August 1945. The Second World War was drawing to a close, yet Japan still would not give up. The United States faced a harsh choice: a costly invasion or a newly born secret weapon. On August 6th at Hiroshima and August 9th at Nagasaki, two blinding detonations ripped open the sky and turned whole cities into scenes of devastation. In the days that followed, more than 200,000 people lost their lives. Those attacks did more than end a war. They ushered in the nuclear era, spread a worldwide dread, and left a persistent, troubling question: were those two bombs truly necessary? By 1945, the tide of World War II had clearly shifted toward the Allies. Germany in Europe had surrendered in May, but in the Pacific, Tokyo kept fighting despite its desperate circumstances. The brutal clashes at Iwima and Okinawa earlier that year exposed the Japanese willingness to fight to the finish. At Okinawa alone, U.S. forces suffered roughly 72,000 casualties, while Japanese military losses exceeded 100,000, with tens of thousands of civilians also killed. With a full-scale invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, on the horizon, American planners feared casualty totals on both sides might climb into the millions. President Harry S. Truman needed a way to force a fast surrender, avoid a bloody land invasion, and satisfy the demand for retribution for Pearl Harbor. At that moment, the United States possessed a clandestine instrument of enormous destructive power: the atomic bomb. The product of the Manhattan Project, launched in 1942 with British and Canadian collaboration. Thousands of top scientists, including Robert Oppenheimer, poured decades of effort into the program. On July 16, 1945, the first atomic device was detonated in the New Mexico desert under the codename Trinity, producing a colossal fireball and a mushroom cloud that marked the beginning of the nuclear age. News of the test reached Truman while he was at the Potsdam Conference with Allied leaders. Soon after, the U.S., Britain, and China issued the Potsdam Declaration, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender under threat of complete destruction. But Tokyo ignored the ultimatum as its leadership remained split. Civilian officials sought negotiations that would protect the emperor's position, while military leaders pushed to fight on, hoping a decisive battle might change the war's course. Faced with this split, Truman chose one of the most disputed acts of the 20th century, using the atomic bomb. A War Department advisory panel led by Secretary Henry L. Stimson debated the options. Some favored a demonstration detonation over an uninhabited area to warn Japan, but many worried that if the demonstration failed to force surrender, the United States would lose the crucial element of surprise. Ultimately, the committee decided the weapon should strike a city large enough to shock both the government and the public into capitulation. Candidate targets included Kyoto, Hiroshima, Yokohama, and Kakura. Although Kyoto's symbolic status put it high on the list, Stimson insisted it be spared for its cultural importance, and it was removed in favor of Nagasaki. The final list read Hiroshima, Kokura, Nagasaki, and Nagata. On July 25, 1945, Truman ordered General Carl A. Spaatz, commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces in the Pacific, to prepare to deploy the atomic bomb against one of those four targets immediately after August 3rd, weather permitting. Two weapons were readied: Little Boy, a uranium-235 bomb intended for Hiroshima, and Fat Man, a plutonium-239 device slated for Kokura with Nagasaki as an alternate. All components were moved to the Tinian Air Base in the Pacific, and by early August, the U.S. was prepared to execute the first nuclear strike in human history, an attack that would both end the war and reshape international relations for decades. Hiroshima, an industrial port city in southwest Honshu, held about 350,000 residents in 1945. Unlike many Japanese cities that had been pummeled by U.S. bombing in the war's final months, Hiroshima remained largely intact, which led to rumors among its people. Some thought it was being preserved to serve as an American headquarters after the war. Others assumed family ties to the United States might have sheltered it. The harsher reality was that its relative untouched state made it an ideal place to reveal the bomb's raw, destructive force. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, the mission launched. At 2:45 a.m., a B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from Tinian carrying Little Boy, the first atomic bomb ever deployed in warfare. Two other B-29s accompanied it, one equipped with scientific instruments and another tasked with photographic documentation. Weather reconnaissance earlier in the day had checked conditions over Hiroshima and the secondary targets Kokura and Nagasaki. Around 5:55 a.m., the aircraft formation regrouped over Iwima as planned, before turning toward Japan. During the flight, Major William Parsons, the mission's technical officer, assembled and armed the bomb aboard the aircraft, fully aware of the danger. A single mishap on takeoff might have destroyed Tinian itself. Only after the bomber reached a safe altitude did he insert the detonator, placing Little Boy in a ready state. By 7:30 a.m., the formation entered Japanese airspace. In Hiroshima, air raid sirens had sounded earlier when radar picked up a few U.S. planes, but seeing only a small number, officials dismissed the threat as mere reconnaissance. At 7:09 a.m., loudspeakers declared the danger past. Residents left shelters, children returned to school, and workers resumed their routines, the city settling back into a summer morning's ordinary calm, the last such calm it would ever know. At 8:15 a.m., the Enola Gay released its deadly load. From nearly 31,000 feet, Little Boy plunged for 44 seconds before detonating about 580 meters above the city center. A flash more intense than sunlight erupted, followed by a fireball of unimaginable heat. With the force equivalent to 16,000 tons of TNT, the blast produced a searing heat wave, a crushing shock front, and an inferno that consumed structures for miles. The intended aim had been the Eoi Bridge, whose T-shape made it visible from the air, but crosswinds carried the bomb roughly 240 meters off course, and it exploded above the Shema Hospital instead. In an instant, everything within roughly a 1.6-kilometer radius was annihilated, and great swathes of the city ignited. Overhead, the Enola Gay banked hard to escape. Within a minute, the shockwave reached the aircraft and shook the 30-ton bomber violently. Tibbets and his crew turned to look back and saw a towering mushroom cloud billowing into the sky. "The light was brighter than the sun," one crewman later said, while Parsons called the scene both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Another officer could only whisper, "My God." A city that minutes before had been filled with ordinary summer activity was now submerged in flames and choking smoke. Survivors later described a blinding bluish-white flash, the pika or lightning flash, as many Japanese called it, followed by an overwhelming roar that hurled people to the ground, beginning a morning of horror unlike anything the world had seen. Temperatures reaching about 4,000 degrees Celsius instantly incinerated human bodies. Within a radius of roughly 1 to 2 kilometers from the hypocenter, the unimaginable heat consumed thousands of men, women, and children, vaporizing some and reducing others to charred remnants. Farther out, countless people were thrown through the air by the blast wave. Homes collapsed, and windows shattered into deadly fragments. Almost immediately, thousands of small fires started from ruptured gas lines, stoves, and electrical wiring, and merged into a vast firestorm whose fierce winds swept victims into the rivers. Within an hour, Hiroshima had turned into a living inferno, streets ablaze, buildings wiped out, dead and dying strewn everywhere. Survivors staggered through the ash, unable to recognize streets and landmarks they had known. The wails of those crushed beneath rubble or writhing from burns echoed across the ruins. Yoshito Matsushige, the only photographer to take pictures in Hiroshima that day, later described the scene as truly horrific, like a piece of hell on earth. By the evening of August 6th, the flames had largely subsided, and the city lay almost obliterated. Roughly 69% of structures were destroyed, and another 6 to 7% heavily damaged. Only the sturdiest reinforced concrete frames remained, including the industrial promotion hall directly beneath the blast. Everyone inside died, yet its skeletal dome endured as a mute witness. Those remains are now preserved as the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the Genbaku Dome, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1996. The human cost defies precise accounting. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people died instantly from the explosion and ensuing fires. In the ensuing days and months, tens of thousands more perished from severe injuries, burns, and a then mysterious illness later identified as radiation sickness. Many who initially appeared unhurt collapsed days later, losing hair and suffering vomiting, internal bleeding, weakness, and death. With Hiroshima's hospitals and infrastructure destroyed, medical aid was virtually non-existent. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Hiroshima was estimated at about 140,000, nearly half the city's pre-war population. Most chillingly, more than 90% of the victims were civilians, women, children, and elderly among them. About 20 Allied prisoners of war, Americans, British, and Dutch, held near the city center also died. Hiroshima became a vast communal grave, and the first place on Earth to experience the catastrophic effects of nuclear warfare. Word of the bomb's terrible power quickly reached Washington. On the afternoon of August 6, 1945, U.S. time, President Harry S. Truman spoke by radio, briefly announcing that the United States had dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, a Japanese military base, and warned that if Japan did not accept the Allies' terms of unconditional surrender at once, it would face a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. The statement made clear America was prepared to continue using atomic weapons until Japan capitulated. Simultaneously, the U.S. military dropped more than 6 million leaflets over dozens of Japanese cities explaining that a single atomic bomb equaled the destructive force of 2,000 B-29s and urging citizens to pressure the emperor to end the war. Ironically, due to distribution problems, Nagasaki did not receive those leaflets until August 10th, after it had already been bombed. Hiroshima's devastation shocked Japan's leadership, but did not produce immediate surrender. The Supreme War Council, including Prime Minister Suzuki and senior military chiefs, held an emergency session. Despite Hiroshima's unprecedented destruction, military leaders remained defiant, still hoping the Soviet Union might intercede or that the United States had limited supplies of the new weapon. The Japanese government quietly pressed 4 conditions for surrender: preservation of the emperor system, kokutai, domestic control of disarmament, avoidance of Allied occupation, and trials for war criminals to be conducted in Japan. The Allies, however, insisted on unconditional surrender, leaving an unbridgeable gap. Emperor Hirohito hesitated, and Prime Minister Suzuki failed to unify his cabinet. Before Tokyo could act, a development they most feared arrived. The Soviet Union declared war. On the night of August 8, 1945, that dread became reality. At 11:00 p.m., Moscow Times Soviet Foreign Minister V.M. Molotov summoned the Japanese ambassador to announce that the USSR was abrogating its neutrality pact. Hours later, in the early morning of August 9th, Tokyo time, the Red Army launched a massive offensive into Manchuria, sending more than 1.5 million troops into Japanese-occupied Manchuria, Korea, and Sakhalin. The move was a strategic knockout. Japan found itself trapped, pressured by American forces from the south and east, and Soviet forces from the north, losing any realistic hope of securing better terms. Yet within Tokyo, the military faction still resisted. War Minister Korechika Anami and the High Command pushed for martial law and even prepared for a possible coup if Emperor Hirohito opted to surrender. During this convulsive turmoil, America's second atomic weapon was already en route to another Japanese city. The second strike had originally been slated for August 11th, to give Japan more time to absorb the shock of Hiroshima, but with poor weather forecast for August 10th and the Soviet declaration of war, U.S. planners moved the mission up to August 9th, 1945. The primary target was the industrial city of Kokura on Kyushu, with Nagasaki as the alternate if Kokura could not be bombed. The second atomic device, nicknamed Fat Man and coded F-31, was fully assembled and assigned to Captain Charles W. Sweeney's crew. Sweeney had flown as pilot of the Great Artiste during the Hiroshima mission and now commanded the B-29 boxcar. At 3:47 a.m., Tinian time boxcar took off carrying Fat Man toward Japan, escorted by two other planes, Lagan Dragon, sent ahead to scout weather over Kokura, and Big Stink, loaded with cameras and observers, including two British officers invited to witness events. This time Colonel Paul Tibbets of Enola Gay fame did not command, leaving Sweeney the authority to decide whether to release the weapon based on conditions. Mechanical trouble surfaced before takeoff when technicians found a broken fuel pump that made 7,000 liters in one tank unusable. That fuel could not be drawn in flight, meaning the bomber had to lug dead weight it could not use. A serious handicap. Although they could have repaired the pump or shifted the weapon to another plane, either choice would have taken hours, and Fat Man already contained a highly sensitive firing mechanism. Sweeney decided to press on despite the limited usable fuel. After nearly 7 hours aloft, Boxcar reached the planned rendezvous off Japan. But Big Stink never appeared because of a navigation mistake, forcing Sweeney to circle for 40 minutes and burn more precious fuel. At 8:45 a.m., he abandoned the rendezvous and headed for Kokura. Reports from the ahead plane said skies were clear, but on arrival, Boxcar found Kokura blanketed in thick smoke from massive fires set by nearby U.S. raids the previous day, and deliberate coal fires lit by factory workers to obscure the city. For nearly 50 minutes, Boxcar made 3 runs over Kokura, seeking a visual aiming point, but more than 70% of the target was hidden, and heavy anti-aircraft fire made a sighted drop impossible. With fuel near critical levels, Sweeney reluctantly left Kokura, an episode that gave rise to the Japanese phrase, "lucky as Kokura," meaning a narrow escape from disaster. The formation then turned for the alternate target, Nagasaki, roughly 150 kilometers away. Nestled among Kyushu's coastal hills and valleys, Nagasaki had sounded an air raid alert at 7:50 a.m. when radar detected incoming aircraft, but by 8:30 a.m., authorities had declared the threat past after only 2 reconnaissance planes were seen, and people resumed normal activities. Workers returned to factories, children to school, and many left shelters, unaware that Nagasaki had been omitted from the leaflet warnings and that Hiroshima had been obliterated 3 days earlier. When Boxcar and its companion arrived around 10:55 a.m., Nagasaki's defenses did not react, likely mistaking the small formation for the earlier recon flight. Captain Charles Sweeney initially planned a radar-based blind drop to conserve time and fuel, but his bombardier, Major Charles Albury, asked for extra minutes, hoping for a break in the cloud. Luck intervened. At 11:01, the clouds parted briefly, and the Urakami Valley Industrial District came into view. Lieutenant Kermit Bayhan sighted the target and released Fat Man from about 9,000 meters. After a 47-second fall, the bomb detonated at 11:02 a.m. on August 9, 1945, once again unleashing nuclear destruction over Japan. Fat Man's plutonium core of roughly 6 kilograms yielded a blast more powerful than Little Boy, exploding about 503 meters above a tennis court in the Urakami Valley, with an energy equivalent to roughly 21,000 tons of TNT, about 30% stronger than the Hiroshima device. Within roughly 1.5 kilometers of the hypocenter factories and homes were wiped out, and northern Nagasaki was flattened. Because the city is ringed by hills and ridges, however, much of the damage was concentrated in the Urakami Valley, rather than spreading across the entire metropolis as in Hiroshima. Downtown and the port suffered comparatively less harm. The bomb missed its intended aiming point, the central bridge, by about 3 kilometers and instead detonated almost directly above the Mitsubishi Torpedo Works, the very factory that had produced weapons used at Pearl Harbor, instantly obliterating the plant and nearby military-industrial facilities. Urakami Cathedral, then one of Asia's largest Catholic churches, was destroyed, and some 6,000 of the parishioners nearby were killed on the spot. With fuel nearly exhausted, the boxcar crew had no time to linger. Sweeney immediately set course for Okinawa, the nearest Allied-held island, and the bomber landed at Yontan Airfield running on fumes. 2 engines failed and the aircraft nearly slid off the runway. Unlike the celebrated return of Enola Gay to Tinian, Boxcar's exhausted crew disembarked in silence, only later grasping how narrowly disaster had been averted. Minutes from having to jettison the bomb at sea or ditch the aircraft. Meanwhile, Nagasaki descended into catastrophe. The city's population was smaller than Hiroshima's, about 263,000 in 1945, but the blast killed an estimated 40,000 people on August 9th alone. By year's end, fatalities rose to between 70,000 and 80,000. The vast majority civilians, including many Mitsubishi workers caught at their posts. The surrounding hills spared some neighborhoods, but within roughly 1.6 kilometers of the hypocenter, nothing survived, and more than half of Mitsubishi's facilities, steelworks, arms plants, and shipyards were destroyed or badly damaged. Unlike Hiroshima, where fires merged into a massive firestorm, Nagasaki's narrow river valley and shifting coastal winds kept the flames more confined, though another horror soon followed. About 20 minutes after the detonation, a black radioactive rain began falling, lasting hours and poisoning many who had initially survived. Altogether, the two bombings killed over 200,000 Japanese by the end of 1945, with estimates ranging from about 150,000 to 246,000. Roughly half died immediately. The remainder succumbed to injuries, burns, and radiation illness in the months that followed. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, once bustling cities, were left in ruins, and the sequence of events: Hiroshima's destruction on August 6th, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria at dawn on August 9th, and Nagasaki's devastation by midday, pushed Japan toward collapse. On the evening of August 9th, Emperor Hirohito attended an emergency council where military leaders still urged continued resistance, even as they admitted the war had become hopeless. Just before midnight, he stepped in personally, announcing Japan would accept the Allies' terms so long as the imperial throne remained. On August 10th, Tokyo communicated this position via Switzerland, and Washington replied it would permit the emperor to stay only in a ceremonial capacity. Hirohito warned that continuing the fight would not only devastate the nation, but threaten the very foundations of civilization. Late on August 14th, a group of extremist officers attempted a coup to stop the imperial broadcast, but the plot collapsed quickly. At noon on August 15th, the emperor spoke on the radio for the first time, calling the atomic bomb a weapon of unparalleled cruelty and declaring acceptance of the Potsdam terms. Though he never uttered the word surrender, his meaning was clear and the war was at an end. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japan formally signed the surrender documents before the Allied delegation, and World War II officially concluded. Ironically, the one condition Japan had pressed for, the preservation of the emperor, was ultimately granted, leaving an enduring question: were the two atomic strikes truly necessary, or might that concession have been arranged sooner? The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki created humanitarian damage on a scale never seen before. In seconds, tens of thousands of lives were snuffed out, overwhelmingly those of non-combatants, women, children, and the elderly who had never taken up arms. Roughly 70,000, 80,000 people died immediately in Hiroshima, and some 40,000, 50,000 in Nagasaki. Tens of thousands more suffered terrible burns and injuries, and endured profound physical and psychological trauma in the days and months that followed. Survivors, known as Hibakusha, bore permanent marks of fire and radiation, skin scarred with grotesque patterns, sometimes even bearing imprints of kimono fabric. Many who seemed unhurt at first later collapsed with baffling symptoms: hair falling out in clumps, bleeding, weakness, and sudden death. With hospitals wrecked and medicine scarce, doctors could do little beyond watch patients deteriorate, only later recognizing acute radiation exposure as the cause. In the years after the attacks, radiation's effects continued to unfold. Survivors experienced heightened rates of leukemia and thyroid cancer, infertility, miscarriages, birth defects, and other chronic illnesses. Whole families were burdened by what came to be seen as a cursed legacy as children were born frail or malformed. Social stigma compounded the suffering, as Hibakusha were often ostracized out of misplaced fear of contagion or genetic harm. Governments and international agencies eventually provided medical care and compensation, but those measures could never fully erase the damage to bodies, families, and communal memory. Both cities had to be rebuilt from near-total ruin. Hiroshima rose from scorched earth, determined to embody a message of peace, preserving the ruined industrial promotion hall as the atomic bomb dome. Nagasaki transformed the Urakami Ground Zero into a peace park and museum. Each year on August 6th and 9th, bells toll at the precise moments the bombs fell, while lanterns drift along rivers as offerings for the lost souls. Immediately after the attacks, information was tightly controlled. The U.S. occupation censored reports, confiscated photographs and film, and restricted foreign journalists. Only a handful, such as Australian reporter Wilfred Burchett, managed to bring early eyewitness accounts to the wider world. At first, some U.S. officials denied long-term radiation effects, even publishing reassurances that the bombs caused no lasting harm. But the physical reality, burned children, charred bodies, entire neighborhoods flattened, could not be hidden. In 1946, the U.S. military released footage of the destruction, a stark demonstration intended to warn other nations of American resolve. Those images shocked international consciences and helped spark a global debate about science, morality, and the future of warfare. As Albert Camus wrote 2 days after Hiroshima, our technological achievements had reached a new level of barbarity, and humanity faced a stark choice: collective suicide or responsible stewardship of science. Out of Hiroshima's ruin grew movements for peace and disarmament. The mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki later helped form Mayors for Peace, a network of cities committed to preventing a recurrence. Yet arguments over the necessity and morality of the bomb have never stopped. Critics maintain Japan was already on the verge of surrender and would have accepted terms that preserved the emperor, while the 1946 U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey suggested Japan might have capitulated by year's end without an invasion, Soviet entry, or atomic strikes. Prominent commanders such as Eisenhower, MacArthur, and Nimitz expressed doubts, calling the use of the bomb unnecessary from a military standpoint. Supporters contend the bombs prevented a far bloodier invasion and saved millions of lives by bringing the conflict to an immediate close, arguing that the twin shocks of the atomic strikes and the Soviet offensive compelled the emperor to override military hardliners. The moral dilemma remains one of modern history's most heated disputes. Whatever the interpretation, Hiroshima and Nagasaki stand as powerful warnings. Nuclear war means total destruction. They are still the only cities ever struck with atomic weapons, and their legacy has been central to efforts to deter nuclear use ever since. Post-war Japan was remade. Its 1947 constitution renounced war. The nation pledged never to possess nuclear arms, and it became a prominent voice for disarmament. The scars, however, persist in Hibakusha lives and in the collective memory and stories passed down through generations. Today, both cities thrive, yet continue to serve as living monuments to peace. Visitors gather beneath the atomic dome at sunset, learn of Sadako folding 1,000 cranes as a prayer for healing, and in Nagasaki the broken-winged statue recalls lives lost in an instant. On Memorial Days, lanterns glide along the rivers as silent petitions for a world without bombs. As Einstein observed, the atomic bomb changed everything except how we think. Nuclear energy can either illuminate our cities or erase civilizations in moments. The lasting lesson of 1945 is urgent and simple. Choose dialogue over destruction, peace over war, so that the catastrophe of those days never happens again.